Discover the amazing, clinically proven health benefits of original Tahitian noni. Original Tahitian noni includes powerful antioxidants, adaptogens, nutrients, and phytonutrients to naturally boost energy levels, immune system function, and overall health. Meticulously sourced from French Polynesia, this is the original superfruit. Accept no imitations. Original Tahitian noni. Visit ATR Health at alchemicaltechrevolution.com. and click on the Shop Here tab for more details.
But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world. Tonight, we're going to discuss Tesla's DeathRay, fact or fiction. There's a lot of scientific developments that have come out in recent years that align heavily with the technologies that Nikola Tesla envisioned in his mind and in his notes and in his notebooks. And there's a lot of speculation and curiosity as to Tesla's DeathRay. You see, shortly before his death in 1943, he had gone public to the press, about a decade prior to that, and began to talk about the development of a DeathRay. This weapon that could be used to use a direct energy beam to destroy aircraft at a distance of about 250 miles or more. He was developing these things in his notes, in his inventions, and at his various laboratories that he had established. One in Colorado, and of course the other one, his latest one, his last known laboratory, at Wardenclyffe on Long Island. Wardenclyffe. This was a very important place in the history of the development of modern technologies, especially as it pertains to directed energy systems. This is where Tesla had developed some of his ideas and began to put the pieces together to build such a device. Not only as a DeathRay, you see, Tesla envisioned the wireless delivery of electricity around the world. No wires. He actually was able to pull this off at his laboratory in Colorado that he had set up. He was actually able to light light bulbs at a distance of some 20 miles away from his tower that he set up there, wirelessly. Now, these technologies have been carefully tucked away from the public by those in the black budget community. You see, they have developed these things. Do you really think they would let something with such potential just sit idly and just leave it go? Now, they'll tell you that many of Tesla's visions were very much far-fetched. But were they really far-fetched? You see, this is the guy that built the backbone of our modern infrastructure today. This is the guy that discovered the advent of alternating current electricity and transformed the world because of that. His inventions and patents are still used today everywhere. Everywhere electricity is generated, there's a Tesla patent involved. And he envisioned the wireless transfer of electricity, as well as radio waves, as being a feasible possibility. And he demonstrated the feasibility of it. And only today are we beginning to see some of that coming to the public sector. These are technologies now in development. And of course, one of his most notorious inventions that he spoke about is the DeathRay. Essentially, it's a directed lightning bolt that can be used for massive destructive capacity as a weapon. And if you think that the intelligence community and the military-industrial complex let this escape their purview, you are sorely mistaken. There's a lot of mystery surrounding what happened to Tesla's notes after his death in 1943. You see, when his body was discovered, somebody had rummaged through his safe, broken open his safe, and stole some of his notes. His notes were missing. There were some things missing before the FBI even went in to confiscate the rest of his notes and notebooks. And then there was this trail of obscurity that followed. They kept these things stored away for a number of years before his relatives in Serbia had petitioned the U.S. government to send all of his belongings to Serbia. And there's actually a museum in Serbia dedicated to Nikola Tesla and his work. And some researchers have gotten access to some of the hidden notes and notebooks in this museum and have been able to piece together bits of his patents and drawings about this DeathRay. Now, many have speculated that Tesla was actually murdered. Now, this is an interesting idea. I mean, Tesla was well into his 80s when he died in 1943, so it is more likely that he died of old age, but there's still always been this speculation by researchers that he was murdered for his DeathRay patents. And certainly we see motivation in certain places for doing this. And there have been some obscure claims made, one claim being made by a guy in Florida who claimed to have gotten a deathbed confession from somebody involved in the murder of Tesla. Now, this can't be fully vetted out or proved or disproven. This is all speculation and hearsay. But this guy claimed to be Otto Skorzeny, this guy who gave the deathbed confession in 1997, just prior to his passing, to another individual in Florida. He claimed he was Otto Skorzeny, and that he was involved in the murder of Nikola Tesla. Himself and Reinhard Gehlen, which, if you're not familiar with who Reinhard Gehlen is, this is the guy who was one of the original founders and directors of what's known as the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which is the precursor to the CIA here in the U.S. And he was a German agent, but he was a double agent, working for the Allied powers, and also working within the Nazi Party. And the claim from this gentleman, who died at a ripe old age of 93 or something like that in 1997, he claimed he was Otto Skorzeny, and that he himself and Reinhard Gehlen actually were the ones who murdered Tesla in his hotel room and took his notes. Now, there is not any evidence to support this, but this is a claim that was made by an individual who claims that he knew this guy, who claimed to be Otto Skorzeny, and made this deathbed confession. A lot of it's based on speculation and hearsay, as I said, but there are those who took this claim very seriously. And it seems that there was possible motivation for the murder of Tesla in taking this patent for the death ray, because it would seem that this technology had the very potential to change outcomes of various war strategies, were anyone able to develop it to its fulfillment and utilize it. And of course, I would argue since that time, these ideas have been taken hold of by the military-industrial complex and run through the gamut of possibilities. So what do we know about Tesla's death ray? Well, tonight we're going to read from a website, Tesla Research, Open Tesla Research, that has a collection of many of his articles and patents and various information about this. What's the reality behind the death ray? Is there a real technology there? Is it something that truly existed and or exists today? What can we determine about this? What do we know? And who, if anyone, has access to these patents? And what can we determine from this? So these questions we're going to take a look at here. The death ray. And it gives a drawing here of what this looked like. And essentially, it looks very much like what Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower looked like. See, it had the little laboratory or powerhouse at the bottom. Had a large tower. And on top of the tower, a sphere. Tesla explained in many articles about experiments or inventions that could produce effects at considerable distances. He described different phenomena which seems to have different nature between each other. Despite his statements about this concept, it has never been demonstrated today that there exists the concept of directed energy weapons, which is applied in different weapons for the military defense to produce effects at a distance. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks, and I will take umbrage with what is claimed here right at the outset from this Open Tesla Research. I don't know how old this website is, but certainly directed energy weapons are a real thing in operation today, and the military does utilize them. And then it gives an article from Electrical Review magazine from March 18th, 1896, wherein Tesla's latest results are put in print. He now produces radiographs at a distance of more than 40 feet. I am producing strong shadows at distances of 40 feet. I repeat, 40 feet and even more. Nor is this all. So strong are the actions on the film that provisions must be made to guard the plates in my photographic department located on the floor above, a distance of fully 60 feet from being spoiled by long exposure to the stray rays. Though during my investigations I have performed many experiments which seemed extraordinary, I am deeply astonished observing these unexpected manifestations, and still more so, as even now I see before me the possibility, not to say certitude, of augmenting the effects with my apparatus at least tenfold. These effects upon the sensitive plate at so great a distance I attribute to the employment of a bulb with a single terminal, which permits the use of practically any desired potential and the attainment of extraordinary speeds of the projected particles. With such a bulb, it is also evident that the action upon a fluorescent screen is proportionately greater than when the usual kind of tube is employed, and I have already observed enough to feel sure that great developments are to be looked for in this direction." End quote. That is directly from Nikola Tesla, March 18th, 1896, Electrical Review magazine. So as early as 1896, this guy was observing phenomena and building apparatus to utilize this phenomena to certain effects. Now, it was said largely that by the mid-1930s is when he had the initial revelation of the death ray. and how he was able to actually, in his mind, build the machine. This is how Tesla operated. He had a unique mind. He was able to produce, in his mind only, now mind you, and this is an interesting claim, but this is what all the Tesla researchers say. They say he was able to actually, in his mind's eye, build these machines and test them to know whether they worked or not before he would put anything even to paper about it. This guy was a true genius. Of course, he was very quirky, too. He was able to produce these different ideas in his head before he put them on paper, and a lot of the things, it is claimed by those that research this, he didn't necessarily put to paper. A lot of these ideas he kept in his head because he didn't want people to steal them and misuse them. So let's continue on with this Tesla research here. Today, we know that X-rays are a form of invisible high-frequency electromagnetic radiation with wavelengths between 10 and 0.01 nanometers corresponding to a frequency of 30 PHz to 3 EHz. They are produced by accelerating electrons at a metal target. In medical application, this is tungsten, rhenium, or molybdenum. X-rays are used in various medical applications. I'm going to pause there. So Tesla is also accredited with finding X-rays. This is the guy that invented X-ray technology. You see, there are many things that we could attribute to Tesla. Radar, X-rays, wireless communication, AC electricity. This is the guy that built the modern foundations of our society. And he largely goes unrecognized in the history books. He was a true genius, and he understood and experimented with electricity in ways that people today don't do. There are some exceptions, don't get me wrong. There are still some of those who have a better grasp of how this all works than myself, and have utilized Tesla's techniques and technologies to be able to produce some results and come to some startling conclusions. But certainly, it escapes the attention of the mainstream. Let's continue here. In 1907, when commenting on the destruction of the French ship Iéna, Tesla noted in a letter to the New York Times that he has built and tested remotely controlled torpedoes, but that electrical waves would be more destructive. And this is another quote from Tesla, quote, "As to projecting wave energy to any particular region of the globe, this can be done by my devices," he wrote. Further, he claimed that, quote, "the spot at which the desired effect is to be produced can be calculated very closely, assuming the accepted terrestrial measurements to be correct," end quote. In 1908, Tesla repeated the idea of destruction by electrical waves to the newspaper. On April 21st, his letter to the editor stated, quote, this is directly from Tesla, quote, "When I spoke of future warfare, I meant that it should be conducted by direct application of electrical waves without the use of aerial engines or other implements of destruction." He also added, "This is not a dream. Even now, wireless power plants could be constructed by which any region of the globe might be rendered uninhabitable without subjecting the population of other parts to serious danger or inconvenience." End quote. That was in 1908, folks. He was talking about this. Now, certainly we can see how much of these ideas have been hidden away. Probably sounded very much like a pipe dream to a lot of people back then. But today, these things seem feasible, don't they? Again, in 1915, in another letter to the editor, Tesla stated, quote, this is 1915, quote, "It is perfectly practical to transmit electrical energy without wires and produce destructive effects at a distance. I have already constructed a wireless transmitter, which makes this possible. When unavoidable, the transmitter may be used to destroy property and life," end quote. 1915, Tesla claims to have already built this. Wireless electricity, which can be used as a dual-use technology. It could be used to destroy things if necessary. But it could also be used to transmit electricity wirelessly. Now this is a fantastic type of a claim that's being made. But was this feasible? Is it feasible? Well, Tesla claimed he was able to do this in 1915. He'd already done so. And then there's a little snippet here, a picture and an article that there's a link to that asks the question, this is from October 1st, 1919, can radio ignite balloons? And this is from Electrical Experimenter magazine, October 1st, 1919. Another story from Tesla. But here is a headline, a clip from a headline from the New York Times from December 8th, 1915, and it says, Tesla's new device like bolts of Thor. He seeks to patent wireless engine for destroying navies by pulling a lever, to shatter armies also. That's what the headline states. New York Times, December 8th, 1915. So he was beginning to speak about this stuff early on. Not even up into the 1930s, but this is when it all seemed to become more feasible. The mass production of these types of devices that could transmit wireless electricity and possibly weaponize it. You see, those within the auspices of the military-industrial complex had a keen interest in the things Tesla was saying, because these technologies could potentially become dual use, as all things do within the auspices of the military black budget projects. So they had a keen interest in what this guy was doing, and they were watching him very closely. Make no doubt about that. Then there's an article here called Tesla's Views on Electricity and the War. This is also from the Electrical Experimenter magazine from August of 1917. And here is the quote. Quote, at the time of those tests, I succeeded in producing the most powerful X-rays ever seen. I could stand at a distance of 100 feet from the X-ray apparatus and see the bones of the hand clearly with the aid of a fluoroscope screen, and I could have easily seen them at a distance several times this by utilizing suitable power. In fact, I could not then produce X-ray generators to handle even a small fraction of the power I had available. But I now have apparatus designed whereby this tremendous energy of hundreds of kilowatts can be successfully transformed into X-rays, end quote. By the same month, Tesla outlined a concept for a primitive radar-like unit. He stated, quote, by their electromagnetic waves use, we may be able to produce at will, from sending a station, an electrical effect in any particular region of the globe, with which we may determine the relative position or course of a moving object, such as a vessel at sea, at the distance traversed by the same or its speed, end quote. Tesla's 1917 proposal for directed energy submarine warfare, also coming from this Electrical Experimenter magazine. 2 articles, Tesla's Views on Electricity and the War, and New Yankee Tricks to Circumvent the U-Boat, from the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette, from August of the same year. And both of these sources quote Tesla as saying, quote, I believe the magnetic method of locating or indicating the presence of an iron or steel mass might prove very practical in locating a hidden submarine, and it is, of course, of paramount importance that we do find means of accurately locating these sub-sea fighters when they are submerged, so that we can, with this information, be ready to close in on them when they attempt to come to the surface. Especially is this important when several vessels are traveling in fleet formation. The location and presence of the enemy submarine can be radiographed to the other vessels by the one doing the magnetic surveying, and by means of nets in some cases or gunfire, and the use of hydro aeroplanes sent aloft from the ships, the enemy underwater stands a mighty good chance of being either bombed, shelled, or netted, end quote. So Tesla, in 1917, August of 1917, was talking about radar, sonar, all of these different ideas that were applications of some of his technologies. Tesla was incorrect in his assumption that high radio frequency waves would penetrate water, but Emile Girardot, who had developed France's first radar system in the 1930s, noted in 1953 that Tesla's general speculation that a very strong high-frequency signal would be needed was correct, stating, quote, Tesla was prophesying or dreaming since he had at his disposal no means of carrying them out, but one must add that if he was dreaming, at least he was dreaming correctly, end quote. So Tesla came up with many of the ideas that underlie radar technologies and sonar technologies. But let's get more into some of the more interesting aspects of this, the topic at hand, the death ray. On July 11th, 1934, the inventor described a new weapon for the first time in the New York Sun and the New York Times as being able to be used against ground-based infantry or for anti-aircraft purposes. The press called it a peace ray, or death ray. Gonna pause for a moment here. You see, the press tried to spin it at that time. They called it a peace ray. And this was just prior to the onset of World War II that he began talking about this. A weapon that could end all warfare. That's essentially what this was. This was the proposal of an anti-aircraft defense system, an anti-infantry defense system, an anti-naval defense system. You see, this could be used with precision to destroy targets at a good distance using just electricity. Essentially a directed lightning bolt. That's how Tesla had envisioned this. And this was 1934, so he began speaking publicly about this. You see how he hinted at these things earlier and said he was able to build this back in 1915. So here we are, some almost 20 years later, and he began talking about this publicly. He probably stayed or remained silent after his initial statements on this because of the Great War, World War I, going on at the point that he claimed he was able to develop this. But now, in the 1930s, he thought it apropos to mention that he has these technologies that can end all wars if applied properly. Could be used as a defense, as a deterrent for warfare of any type. And thus the press called it a peace ray. But of course it later became known as the death ray, and that's probably a more apropos name for it. Tesla announced to the world two astonishing new inventions. The first was a particle beam projector that Tesla intended to be used as an instrument of national defense. He called his system Teleforce. With this machine, he declared that a nation could bring wholesale destruction upon invading armies and shoot down fleets of incoming aircraft at a distance of 200 miles away. While the basic beam weapon concept was first revealed in 1934, on Tesla's 78th birthday, specific details about the actual device have been difficult to obtain. And I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. You see, back in 2016, the FBI declassified documents pertaining to the seizure of Tesla's notes. And many things came to the surface at that point. Many things came to the surface. There were hidden notes that many people were unaware of, not only at the Tesla Museum in Serbia, but there were pieces missing. Now, eyewitness testimonies who had obtained these documents for the museum in Serbia from the FBI claim that there were pages missing from his notes. So there's been a lot of speculation that the U.S. government had seized many of these important documents pertaining to Tesla's death ray. And of course, it's only speculation. You can't really prove it because they like to hide their footprints very well. But certainly, there were notes that were unrevealed to the public before that time in those documents in the Serbian museum that they kept tucked away and hidden away for various purposes, mostly political purposes. But these things have now surfaced and come to the light of day. There were notes obtained from the museum in Serbia post-2016, around 2017 or 2018, which began to show more details about Tesla's death ray that he envisioned and potentially built. And we'll see here a little bit more about that. But in 1934, on his 78th birthday, is when he began to release some specific details about his idea of a beam weapon, a death ray. 1 year later, during his annual birthday press conference on July 10th, 1935, Tesla claimed a method to transmit mechanical energy with minimal loss over any terrestrial distance, allowing for a new means of communication and a technique for the location of subterranean mineral deposits. Tesla's mechanical power transmission system, he dubbed it the art of telegeodynamics, and it was based primarily upon his reciprocating engine invention patented in 1894. While the fundamental operating principles of Tesla's mechanical oscillator are well understood, little has been said about how this machine would have been used for underground prospecting. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. Ground-penetrating radar. Essentially, that's what he's talking about, a type of ground-penetrating radar that he was able to develop with this engine patent that he invented in 1894. This guy was way ahead of his time. You see, had this guy been properly funded and had enough brilliant minds working with him in the development of some of these technologies, our world would look very different today. But of course, those greedy benefactors who were funding his work didn't like the prospect of not being able to profit off of his inventions. So they cut his funding, J.P. Morgan being one of his primary financiers, who has famously done so. He's famously quoted to have said, "How do I put a meter on that?" when Tesla was referring to the wireless transmission of electricity. These are the kinds of things Tesla was working on at his Wardenclyffe laboratory. And of course, the power structure at that time didn't want to lose control of their monopoly on energy. And it's the same thing going on today. So we have this notion here. Tesla was developing these technologies that could potentially wirelessly transmit electricity. Could be used in a number of applications. He had a profound understanding of how electricity works that's still lost on our sciences today. In Leland Anderson's newest book, Nikola Tesla's Teleforce and Telegeodynamics Proposals, these two important papers, hidden for more than 60 years, are presented for the first time. The principles behind Teleforce, the particle beam weapon, and telegeodynamics, the mechanical Earth resonance concept for seismic exploration, are fully addressed. And I'm going to pause before we continue. This telegeodynamics, mechanical Earth resonance concept, this is probably the basis for the legend of Tesla's earthquake machine. Now, was this a real device? It seems plausible based upon what we know about resonant frequency. Using resonant frequency, you could attune a certain location to a certain frequency and cause certain destructive effects. by maintaining that. So this also seems like a feasible weapon system that could have been developed from these same technologies explored by Tesla, the beam weapon and the telegeodynamic system. In addition to copies of the original documents typed on Tesla's official stationery, this work also includes 2 reader's aid sections that guide the reader through the more technical aspects of each paper. The papers are followed by commentary sections which provide historical background and functional explanations of the 2 devices. Significant newspaper articles and headline accounts are provided to document the first mention of these proposals. A large appendix provides a wealth of related material and background information, followed by a bibliography section and index. And just to repeat, this book is titled Nikola Tesla's Teleforce and Telegeodynamics Proposals by Leland Anderson. If you want to look up that book, I'm sure there's some very interesting information in there pertaining to these technologies. So Tesla announced his new beam weapon in numerous newspaper interviews on his 78th birthday. In 1934, Tesla moved to his final residence, room 3327 of the recently completed New Yorker Hotel. I'm going to pause for a second to point out 3327 is divisible by 3. Tesla was obsessed with the numbers 3, 6, and 9. And he had a lot of obsessive compulsive type behaviors relating to these numbers with the various things he did in his daily life. You see, like I said, he was a genius, but he was very quirky. He would probably be considered autistic by today's standards in some of his behavioral aspects. That's a topic for another day, though. But his eccentricities really show in his obsession with the numbers 3, 6, and 9, and he did delegate some importance to these numbers, and I think there's a foundational basis in nature for the use of these numbers in the applications and ways Tesla was referring to with them. Anyway, in 1934, he moved to the New Yorker Hotel, where he lived alone with his ideas and his pigeons for the next decade. He posted a typewritten note on the door, "Please do not disturb the occupant of this room." In Tesla's mind, it was time to reveal his greatest invention, a perfect and impossible idea, a weapon to prevent World War II. Going to pause for a moment. So his idea of the DeathRay was to prevent warfare. You see, he saw it as a defense system. He saw it as a means of staving off any type of conflict. A deterrent. A nuclear deterrent before the ostensible or the claimed invention of nuclear weapons. A nuclear deterrent. This was the original nuclear deterrent of sorts. On July 11th, 1934, the headline on the front page of the New York Times announced, quote, "Tesla at 78 bears new death beam." And here's quotes from the article. "Will send concentrated beams of particles through the free air of such tremendous energy that they will bring down a fleet of 10,000 enemy airplanes at a distance of 250 miles from a defending nation's border and will cause armies of millions to drop dead in their tracks. When put in operation," Dr. Tesla said, "this latest invention of his would make war impossible. This death beam," he asserted, "would surround each country like an invisible Chinese wall, only 1,000,000 times more impenetrable. It would make every nation impregnable against attack by airplanes or by large invading armies." That's the end of the quote from this New York Times article. This was 1934, folks. Now, in the 1980s, the Reagan administration introduced the SDI platform, the space-based weapons system, Star Wars Defense. You may remember that if you're old enough. That operates on similar principles. But of course, the technology at that time was far more advanced than what we thought at the time. When you consider Tesla was talking about this type of thing in the 1930s. This is how the special access programs of the military-industrial complex operate. The technologies they develop and explore are bare minimum 30 to 50 years old. Older than what's represented in the public sector. So if you see a technology in the public sector as the newest state-of-the-art technology, be assured it's already been put through its paces by the military-industrial complex and weaponized in every possible way that it can be by the black budget community. Then it is released for public consumption and for other usages. This is what's known as dual-use technology. Always has a military operative back door built into it. A perfect example of this is your cell phone. It's a surveillance platform that they found other public sector uses for. But rest assured, it has military back doors built into it. They can utilize it, and I think that's demonstrable. I think this is one of the largely accepted dual-use technologies that we have today. Just as an example. But what Tesla was talking about here was a nuclear deterrent before the ostensible invention of nuclear weapons. Let's continue here. Joseph Butler, a U.S. Air Force expert on beam weapons, has said of Tesla's idea, quote, "Definitely he had the concept of a charged particle beam weapon back in the 1930s. The concept was right on the mark. Particles projected out long distances to do damage to some enemy airplanes in his particular case. But Butler added, I haven't a clue how he meant to actually do it." And that was in an interview in 1998 that this guy said this. So here's the thing. Once again, we have a misconstruing of Tesla's ideas. Particles. Everything falls down to this notion of particles in the cult of atomism. The quantum crowd. Everything's got to be a fundamental particle. Well, when you begin to understand electricity doesn't function in that way, and I think Tesla understood this, it's not based on particles. That's not the reality. It's a reification, a man-made reification, so that they could mathematically compute what they need to in an objective fashion. You see, it's a quantification method of a thing that is not objectively quantifiable. In fact, the electron itself is just a unit of measurement. It was never intended as a fundamental particle in its original conception. It was just a method for measuring electrical discharge. But of course, we see what has happened since then and how our physics has been transformed in the modern era with our modern science. But it's all about quantifying the concept. Make no mistake about that. The inventor envisioned war in the future as a mere contest between machines. This concept was illustrated by Paul Frank and appeared in Science and Invention from February 1922. Sensing a business opportunity, Tesla commissions architect Titus de Bobola in 1934 to draw plans of what the new particle beam weapon towers might look like and contacts several governments around the world to try to sell his plans. So Tesla was making a go at trying to convince nations to adopt this defense system as a deterrent to war. He was trying to sell his plans, and he had this artist conceptualize what it would look like based upon his patents and his drawings. And of course, it looks very much like the Wardenclyffe Tower, if you go back and look at the old photos. Except on top, instead of a half sphere, it has a full sphere on top. Principles and concepts of Tesla's DeathRay. A New York Herald Tribune article from July 11, 1934. The headline reads, "Beam to kill Army at 200 miles, Tesla's claim on 78th birthday." Quote, "First and most important is a mechanism for producing rays and other energy manifestations in free air. Hitherto, vacuum tubes have always been necessary. Second is an apparatus for producing unheard-of quantities of electrical current and for controlling it when produced. The current is necessary as power for the first mechanism. Without this, no rays of sufficient strength could be produced. The third is a method of intensifying and amplifying the second process. And the fourth is a method of producing tremendous electrical repellent force." End quote. On July 23, 1934, Time magazine wrote an article about Tesla's death ray. Quote, "Last week, Dr. Tesla announced a combination of 4 inventions which would make war unthinkable. The nucleus of the idea is a death ray, a concentrated beam of submicroscopic particles flying at velocities approaching that of the speed of light. The beam, according to Tesla, would drop an army in its tracks, bring down squadrons of airplanes 250 miles away. Inventor Tesla would discharge the ray by means of, number 1, a device to nullify the impeding effect of the atmosphere on the particles. Number 2, a method for setting up high potential. Number 3, a process for amplifying that potential to 50 million volts. And number 4, creation of a tremendous electrical repelling force. According to Tesla, production of the particle beam is dependent upon the following 4 inventions. And these are outlined in an article called "The New Art of Projecting Concentrated Non-Dispersive Energy Through Natural Media," and this is one of his patents. This is an article outlining his patent. Number 1, a method and apparatus for producing rays and other manifestations of energy in free air, eliminating the high vacuum necessary at present for the production of such rays and beams. This is accomplished with a novel form of high vacuum tube, one end of which is open to the atmosphere. The projectiles are accelerated in a vacuum and then conducted into the atmosphere through a valvular conduit. And he has drawings here of all of this. This is the actual patent for Tesla's death ray. The actual patent, describing how it works. Number 2, a method and process for producing very great electrical force in the range of 60 million volts to propel the particles to their objective. Tesla specified that this could be done with a large electrostatic generator on a new principle and of very great power, in many respects similar to a Van de Graaff generator. In place of a charge-carrying belt, it employs a circulating stream of desiccated air that is propelled through a hermetically sealed ductwork by a Tesla disc blower. A Wardenclyffe-type apparatus could also be used for this purpose. Gonna pause for a moment here. So once again, we see built into Tesla's patent here, dual use. Even by his own standards. Wardenclyffe, the original intention was the wireless transmission of electricity. Well, when you can concentrate this electricity into a beam, as Tesla had proposed through his inventions here, and magnified, you can produce a beam weapon of massive destructive capacity. Number 3, a method for amplifying this process in the second invention. The exterior of the high-potential terminal is equipped with numerous bulbs of some insulating material, each containing an electrode of thin metal sheet suitably rounded and exhausted to the highest vacuum obtainable. Number 4, a new method for producing a tremendous electrical repelling force in the form of provisions for impairing to a minute particle an extremely high charge. It appears this refers to the internal conducting component, the socket, and central extension at the base of the projector or gun element of the system, while the specific details about this aspect of the design are not readily apparent. It seems that strict attention to the fulfillment of requirements 1, 2, and 3 is critical to success. In Tesla's words, quote, "By the application of my discoveries, it is possible to increase the force of repulsion more than 1,000,000 times, and what was heretofore impossible is rendered easy of accomplishment," end quote. So Tesla really understood the potential behind this. So one of the key applications here, the original intention behind the tower that he was building at Wardenclyffe, and certainly this invention was the wireless transmission of electricity. Well, when you could focus that into a type of a gun weapon, which he had developed here with the DeathRay, it could be concentrated, magnified, amplified, and used to great destructive effect. Essentially, it is a directed lightning bolt. Tesla described the idea of the DeathRay as follows. A giant electrostatic generator run by one of his turbines to accelerate tiny particles of mercury to produce such a beam of super high-powered bullets of several million volts. Since they were accelerated in a vacuum, Tesla needed a way to spit them out of the accelerator sphere without letting air in. He proposed to do this with the special nozzle which blew high-pressure air around an open tube leading to the evacuated sphere and acted like a constantly renewing plug to preserve the vacuum. What happens to the mercury stream after it left the nozzle and had to travel through the atmosphere was another matter that was never quite figured out. So I'm going to pause for a moment. So now Tesla's talking about using mercury in this. So this is not just, on the face of it, an electrical discharge. This is actually sending real particles out there. So he was talking about actual particles, just not electrical particles as many have misconstrued it. He was using mercury as a component here. Tiny microscopic particles of mercury being propelled by this energy beam. So this would be something akin to a bullet of sorts, propelled at such high speed and velocity it would cause massive destructive capability. So this is what he was using, and I think he was thinking in terms of mercury because this would seal the vacuum tube as it left. And that's what he had in mind. So he's using actual physical particles as a type of weapon, as a beam weapon. Now, I don't know how this may have been taken into account in some of the military applications hereof, or how many of our technologies of what we would call beam weapons today have come about. It doesn't seem practical to have to implement mercury with this, but this also brings to mind the notion of the Nazi Bell Project. If you're familiar with the Bell Project, you know it's said that it used a very similar type of mechanism here. Mercury. Mercury was used in the Bell Project. Now, did it have something to do with Tesla's patents? Or Tesla's ideas of the DeathRay? What were the Nazis really working on with this Bell Project? Who knows? What we do know is the Germans had a vested interest in Tesla's technologies, as did the Russians, as did the Americans, as did many other people around the world. And many people were actually looking at this. But the question is, what happens to the mercury stream after it left the nozzle and had to travel through the atmosphere was another matter that was never quite figured out, really. Maybe it was. But maybe they're not talking about that. In the DeathRay proposal, Tesla used the term particles, but he didn't mean atomic particles like protons, neutrons, etc., but he meant microscopic droplets accelerated in an electron tube by the action of the repulsion of the electrostatic force. So I'm going to pause here. So now we have this misnomer being addressed here. Tesla was talking about accelerating actual particles. Microscopic particles of mercury at such high speeds and velocities with this electrical discharge that it could be propelled as a weapon. A physical weapon with destructive capacities that could potentially be unimaginable. They're not sure what would happen to this stream of mercury once it hits the atmosphere after it's discharged in this way and propelled. Well, this gives you, since it is a physical propulsive force being used here, akin to a gun in certain aspects, you would be able to aim this weapon then. This would give it the potential to steer and direct the bolt in the generalized direction where it would go. Now, what would this look like? Would it look like a lightning discharge, shooting a lightning bolt into the sky and striking down a target? Or would it be an invisible beam that's projected from this? It's hard to say for sure. Let's go ahead and continue here, though. The electrostatic attractions and repulsions between bodies of measurable dimensions are, of all the manifestations of this force, the first so-called electrical phenomena noted. But though they have been known to us for many centuries, the precise nature of the mechanism concerned in these actions is still unknown to us and has not been even quite satisfactorily explained. What kind of mechanism must that be? We cannot help wondering when we observe two magnets attracting and repelling each other with a force of hundreds of pounds, with apparently nothing between them. We have in our commercial dynamos magnets capable of sustaining in mid-air tons of weight. But what are even these forces acting between magnets when compared with the tremendous attractions and repulsions produced by electrostatic force, to which there is apparently no limit as to its intensity? In lightning discharges, bodies are often charged to so high a potential that they are thrown away with inconceivable force and torn asunder or shattered into fragments. Still, even such effects cannot compare with the attractions and repulsions which exist between charged molecules or atoms, and which are sufficient to project them with speeds of many kilometers a second, so that under their violent impact bodies are rendered highly incandescent or are volatilized. It is of special interest for the thinker who inquires into the nature of these forces to note that whereas the actions between individual molecules or atoms occur seemingly under any conditions, the attractions and repulsions of bodies of measurable dimensions imply a medium possessing insulating properties. So, if air, either by being rarefied or heated, is rendered more or less conducting, these actions between two electrified bodies practically cease, while the actions between the individual atoms continue to manifest themselves. An experiment may serve as an illustration and as a means of bringing out other features of interest. Some time ago, I showed that a lamp filament or wire mounted in a bulb and connected to one of the terminals of a high-tension secondary coil is set spinning, the top of the filament generally describing a circle. This vibration was very energetic when the air in the bulb was at an ordinary pressure and became less energetic when the air in the bulb was strongly compressed. It ceased altogether when the air was exhausted so as to become comparatively good conducting. I found at that time that no vibration took place when the bulb was very highly exhausted, but I conjectured that the vibration which I ascribed to the electrostatic action between the walls of the bulb and the filament should take place also in a highly exhausted bulb. To test this under conditions which were more favorable, a bulb like the one that I used was constructed. It comprised a globe in the neck, of which was sealed a platinum wire, with carrying a thin lamp filament. In the lower part of the globe, a tube was sealed so as to surround the filament. The exhaustion was carried as far as it was practicable with the apparatus employed. This bulb verified my expectation, for the filament was set spinning when the current was turned on and became incandescent. It also showed another interesting feature bearing upon the preceding marks, namely, when the filament had been kept incandescent some time, the narrow tube and the space inside were brought to an elevated temperature, and as the gas in the tube then became conducting, the electrostatic attraction between the glass and the filament became very weak or ceased, and the filament came to rest. When it came to rest, it would glow far more intensely. This was probably due to its assuming the position in the center of the tube where the molecular bombardment was most intense, and also partly to the fact that the individual impacts were more violent and that no part of the supplied energy was converted into mechanical movement. Since, in accordance with the accepted views in this experiment, the incandescence must be attributed to the impacts of the particles, molecules, or atoms in the heated space, these particles must therefore, in order to explain such action, be assumed to behave as independent carriers of electric charges immersed in an insulating medium. Yet there is no attractive force between the glass tube and the filament, because the space in the tube is, as a whole, conducting. Going to continue on here. These are from Tesla himself, from his patent ideas. It is of some interest to observe in this connection that whereas the attraction between two electrified bodies may cease owing to the impairing of the insulating power of the medium in which they are immersed, the repulsion between the two bodies may still be observed. This may be explained in a plausible way. When the bodies are placed at some distance in a poorly conducting medium, such as slightly warmed or rarefied air, and are suddenly electrified, opposite electric charges being imparted to them, these charges equalize more or less by leakage through the air. But if the bodies are similarly electrified, there is less opportunity afforded for such dissipation. Hence, the repulsion observed in such case is greater than the attraction. Repulsive actions in a gaseous medium are, however, as Professor Crookes has shown, enhanced by molecular bombardment. So I'm going to pause, and let's translate some of that. So Tesla is talking about the potential to create a type of repulsive force through the use of this device, to push things away. Repulsive force. So this could be an extremely destructive force if applied in that way. And this is one of the important ideas here. So he's talking about these potentials of electrical experimentation and these observations he made about not only magnetism, but electricity as well, and these are basically one and the same force, as described here by Tesla. They're one and the same force. They're separate manifestations. They're two sides of the same coin. Let's put it that way. Electricity and magnetism are just inherently related. It's called the dielectric field. That's how we know it today. And there were many researchers looking at how this operates and functions, and Tesla was looking at the application of using this electricity to produce results within a gaseous medium and being able to propel particles of that gaseous medium out into the air in order to produce a repulsion effect, which would create a very destructive bolt, really. So now he's talking about using mercury in this system as well, along with this gas, to seal off the end of the tube to keep this thing from actually blowing to pieces, really, when it comes in contact with air. So was this a feasible technology? Seems there might be something to it. In some moment of his life, Tesla believed in the possibility of the atomic energy as a source of energy, but after some years of research, he stated just the opposite as a result of his experiments by accelerating and crushing atomic particles. For this reason, it is supposed that some kind of particle accelerator would be necessary to develop such experiments. However, the details are unknown. The utilization of electron tubes, or cathode tubes, is described in some articles and interviews about Tesla's DeathRay. So I'm going to pause here. There's an important thing to be taken out of this paragraph here that we just read from. It says some years after his research, he stated just the opposite. You see, early on, Tesla believed in the possibility of using atomic energy as a source of energy. The nuclear aspect, nuclear energy. But it does say here, after some years of research, he stated just the opposite as a result of his experiments. You see, he experimented before the Manhattan Project on accelerating and crushing atomic particles in some of his apparatus. And the results he came to, the observations he made, led him to believe that seeking after this nuclear energy was a misnomer, wasn't going to be feasible. Keep that in mind. Now, this is a massively important detail that's lost on much of the public. Tesla did not condone or accept nuclear energy as has been presented to us in the modern era. His experiments contradicted that possibility. So what's really going on? Was he right? Was he wrong? Did he underestimate this? Certainly we have nuclear power plants and the like today. But essentially, what is this? Let's really look at this stuff for what it is. What powers the power plant? Well, essentially, when it comes down to brass tacks, any power plant, whether it be a coal plant, a nuclear plant, whatever source of fuel they use, it's all about boiling water and creating steam. That's all that's done at a power plant. Powers a generator, a steam-powered generator. By the way, the generator patents are Tesla's patents to produce electricity. It's all about efficiently boiling water. So can nuclear energies be used to boil water? Possibly. But I don't think, according to Tesla's work here, it has the potential to be a standalone source of energy. You see, you need to do certain things with that in order to produce electricity. You don't just split an atom and it produces electricity. That's not how it works. You have to boil water and turn a turbine in a generator to produce electricity. And I think that's what Tesla was getting at here. So it didn't seem like a feasible source for producing results for him. Now, does that discredit all of nuclear theory? No, certainly not. But you have to understand, this guy was a genius unlike anything we see today. He was already doing the experiments and recording his observations way ahead of the game. And he was coming up with some ulterior results. Opposite results of what the mainstream has pushed in the modern era. Now, is there some form of deception going on here? Was Tesla right and they were wrong, or were they right and Tesla was wrong? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. But what we do know for certain is there is a certain off-the-books physics that is practiced within the special access programs of the military-industrial complex. Things more closely associated and akin to Tesla's research than that of what is presented in the mainstream as the modern state of the art. So is there a type of deception going on in this notion? Perhaps. Perhaps there is. I don't have the answers to that. We'll leave that open to speculation and debate, but Tesla certainly came to the conclusion he didn't think that nuclear power was a feasible thing. Or at least it didn't produce what they thought it was going to produce. Let's put it that way. So then here we have an article called Harnessing Nature, Can the Free Energy of Space Be Utilized? This is from Scientific American, April 5th, 1913. Quote, Experiments conducted by Mr. Nikola Tesla with electromotive forces of 2 million volts have convinced him that if 100 million volts could be produced, it might be possible to break down the atomic structure of any element and thus liberate a certain amount of energy. But, he told the writer of this article, even if the feat could be accomplished and sufficient energy set free, there still remains the enormously difficult problem of devising means of utilizing the energy in a practical way. So I'm going to pause there. So Tesla is not outside considering that a tremendous amount of energy can be released by doing that, but he proposes going about it in a different way, by producing 100 million volts to break down the atomic structure. Now, he doesn't think this seems practical, because even if you can do it, how do you harness that energy in a practical way? Well, essentially what's been done is you can boil water with it to do so, using one of Tesla's electrical generators. So, that being the case, this is how nuclear power has come to be. It's just a fancier way to boil water, let's put it that way. Is it more energy efficient? I don't know. Is it more sustainable? I don't know. Is it more dangerous? I don't know. Once again, we have all of these things come into question. And we certainly also have the question of weaponized nuclear forces. How could this be applied to a weapon system? And of course, Tesla didn't think it was practical. But let's continue here. Tesla, age 75, predicts new power source. This is from the New York Times, July 5th, 1931. Quote, "When and where do you expect to make the official announcement of your new discoveries?" the inventor was asked. "These discoveries," he replied, "did not come to me overnight, but as the result of intense study and experimentation for nearly 36 years. I am naturally anxious to give the facts to the world as soon as possible, but I also wish to present them in a finished form. That may take a few months or a few years. The idea of atomic energy is illusionary, but it has taken so powerful a hold on the minds that although I have preached against it for 25 years, there are still some who believe it to be realizable. I have disintegrated atoms in my experiments with a high-potential vacuum tube I brought out in 1896, which I consider one of the best inventions. I have operated it with pressures ranging from 4 million to 18 million volts. More recently, I have designed an apparatus for 50 million volts, which should produce many results of great scientific importance. But as to atomic energy, my experimental observations have shown that the process of disintegration is not accompanied by a liberation of such energy as might be expected from the present theories." That's the end of the quote. So that was Tesla in 1931. So based upon Tesla's observations, it seems feasible that there could be some deceptions going on as pertaining to nuclear power. Once again, all of this is open for debate and speculation. Was Tesla wrong, or were the other scientists who were exploring nuclear power wrong? Hard to say for sure, but this guy was the pioneer. And he had been vociferously speaking out against trying to utilize this nuclear energy concept for 25 years at that point. Because early on in his experiments, he was doing that. So what really goes on with the use of nuclear energy? Hard to tell. I don't have the answers, folks. I'll leave that open for your speculation. But getting back on point, back to the DeathRay implementation itself. Aerial defense death beam offered to the U.S. by Tesla. This is from the Baltimore Sun, July 12, 1940. The voltages for propelling the death beam to its objective, he stated, will attain a potential of 50 million volts. With this enormous voltage, he said, microscopic particles of matter will be catapulted on their mission of defensive destruction. So once again, going to pause and remember now, Tesla was talking about using mercury within the apparatus as the microscopic particle to be propelled through the electrical beam of this death ray as a destructive force. Think about that. Now, this is something that many of us don't realize about this concept of Tesla's death ray, and this is probably where a lot of things have been misconstrued, because people were primarily thinking it's a way of trying to channel an electrical current into a type of a bolt, like a lightning bolt. That's not what his intention was. You see, he was propelling an actual physical object with this bolt, a highly charged object, at a high velocity, approaching the velocity of the speed of light. At such speeds, this would have immense destructive power. So is there a reality to this? Hard to say. Let's read now. This is from the New York Herald Tribune, July 11th, 1934. Beam to kill Army at 200 miles, Tesla's claim on 78th birthday. It's an electric gun. The beam of force itself, as Dr. Tesla described it, is a concentrated current. It need be no thicker than a pencil of microscopic particles moving at several hundred times the speed of artillery projectiles. The machine into which Dr. Tesla combines his four devices is, in reality, a sort of electrical gun. He illustrated the sort of thing that the particles will be by recalling an incident that occurred often enough when he was experimenting with a cathode tube. Then, sometimes a particle larger than an electron, but still very thin, would break off from the cathode, pass out of the tube, and hit him. He said he could feel a sharp, stinging pain where it entered his body, and again at the place where it passed out. The particles in the beam of force, ammunition, which the operators of the generating machine will have to supply, will travel far faster than such particles as broke off from the cathode, and they will travel in concentrations, he said. As Dr. Tesla explained it, the tremendous speed of the particles will give them their destruction-dealing qualities. All but the thickest armored surfaces confronting them would be melted through in an instant by the heat generated in the concussion. I should also say, and this is perhaps as important as anything else about it, that in this apparatus all limitations as to electric force and the quantity of electricity transmitted have been removed. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So Tesla is describing an immensely powerful weapon that doesn't necessarily translate into a lightning bolt unleashed on a target. A targeted lightning bolt. That's not what it is. This is an actual physical thing being propelled. That's the basis of his death ray. Now, yes, it's going to be superheated like plasma in a lightning bolt. But we're talking these are physical particles of some sort, and he was suggesting mercury would fulfill this. So these destructive capacities that this would potentially have seems massive. Especially when he's saying here that all limitations of electric force and quantity of electricity transmitted have been removed. So you could amp this up to any type or level of energy that you want. This could be a massively destructive thing. Massively. When you consider the ramifications here. Now, like I said, there's an interesting crossover here that I had never thought about before. Tesla's death ray and the Nazi Bell project. Die Glocke. Mercury used in the cyclotron of the bell. Mercury used in what could be considered a cyclotron in Tesla's death ray tower here. Interesting. Interesting. So it's all about forming this gun system, a targeting system, and that's what was one of the patents, one of the 4 patents here that Tesla had applied to the DeathRay. Let's read on and see what else we can garner here. Now, here's a prepared statement of Tesla for an interview with the press that he did on his 81st birthday observance. Quote, "There is one more discovery which I want to announce at this time, consisting of a new method and apparatus for the obtainment of vacua exceeding many times the highest heretofore realized. I think that as much as 1/1000th of a micron can be attained. What may be accomplished by means of such vacua is a matter of conjecture, but it is obvious that they will make possible the production of much more intense effects in electron tubes. My ideas regarding the electron are at a variance with those generally entertained. I hold that it is a relatively large body carrying a surface charge and not an elementary unit. When such an electron leaves an electrode of extremely high potential and in very high vacuum, it carries an electrostatic charge many times greater than the normal. This may astonish some of those who think that the particle has the same charge in the tube and outside of it in the air. A beautiful and instructive experiment has been contrived by me, showing that such is not the case, for as soon as the particle gets out into the atmosphere, it becomes a blazing star, owing to the escape of the excess charge. The great quantity of electricity stored on the particle is responsible for the difficulties encountered in the operation of certain tubes and the rapid deterioration of the same." Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. Now, I do find it compelling that Tesla uses the term a blazing star. This kind of gives me some repose to some various esoteric doctrines when I'm thinking in those terms. But what he's saying here is we make assumptions. And the notion of an electron as a fundamental particle is an assumption. You see, it's just a unit of measurement for the discharge of electricity. That's what the original use of the term has always been. But our modern science, with the cult of bumping particles, has conflated it to being a subatomic fundamental particle, when that's not necessarily the case. It's not the same thing being described in the physics of the ether model. Proposing the DeathRay for defense. This is a Philadelphia Inquirer article from October 20th, 1940. Quote, "It is based on an entirely new principle of physics that nobody has ever dreamed of. It is different from the principle embodied in many... let me start that again. Quote, "It is based on an entirely new principle of physics that nobody ever has dreamed of. It is different from the principle embodied in my inventions relating to the transmission of electrical power from a distance, for which I hold a number of basic patents. After preliminary laboratory experiments, I made tests on a large scale with the transmitter referred to, and a beam of ultraviolet rays of great energy in an attempt to conduct the current to the high rarefied strata of the air, and thus create an auroral display, such as might be utilized for illumination, especially of oceans at night. I found that there was some virtue in the principle, but the results did not justify the hope of important practical applications, although some years later several inventors claimed to have produced a DeathRay in this manner. While the published reports to this effect were entirely unfounded, I believe that with the new transmitter to be built, many wonders will be achieved." End quote. So we see here other interesting crossovers. Tesla used a large-scale transmitter and ultraviolet rays to produce auroral effects in the atmosphere. What did we witness here recently? auroral effects in the atmosphere. Now, some people have claimed that this wasn't the result of solar flares, but it was an experiment produced by HAARP or similar type systems. Now, is this true? I don't know. I haven't explored or vetted out that way of thinking, but it can be done. Tesla proved it. At any rate, we see here many of Tesla's patents were important in the production of some modern technologies. Things like particle accelerators. Of course, we know our whole foundation of the wireless communication networks are based upon his technologies. Alternating current electricity, his generators are used everywhere to produce electricity. We have all these different things attributed to Tesla. And his most controversial invention, the DeathRay, has always been something that people disregard as being a true thing. But we have some extensive documentation of things that are akin to Tesla's DeathRay that are utilized in the modern era. Of course, we're speaking of directed energy weapons. These things do exist, and I think a lot of it has come to pass because of the study of Tesla's DeathRay. Did it really exist? Did he build it? He claims to have been able to build this in 1915. He's experimented with it and has ramped it up and announced in 1934 that it was now possible, and he tried to sell it to certain governments around the world. And only the Russians bought some of the preliminary stages of his patent, and what they did with that is still unknown. But we know we have modern directed energy weapons. After a century of Tesla's ideas, we still don't know about the feasibility of his DeathRay, but some modern technologies are becoming a reality with the same objectives. A directed energy weapon emits highly focused energy, transferring that energy to a target to damage it. Potential applications of this technology include anti-personnel weapon systems, potential weapon defense systems, and the disability of lightly armored vehicles such as cars, drones, jet skis, electronic devices such as mobile phones, military applications for blocking enemy electronics and communications, protecting convoys in high-risk IED zones, systems able to protect critical areas and equipment, as well as new systems for police and civil enforcement deployment, are all driving continued research and development in directed energy systems. And of course, this goes on to mention the SDI system, the Star Wars Defense System, from Los Alamos National Laboratory in 1989, when the Reagan administration announced this in the 1980s. And they ostensibly began to develop these space-based weapons. We don't know the truth about all of this, but we do know many of these were based on some of Tesla's patents and ideas. Directed energy weapons, well, now, these have gotten beyond what Tesla envisioned with his DeathRay. Now we have scalar weapons. These things are a magnitude greater than Tesla's DeathRay, and these have been developed. And by the way, as an added note, the feasibility of Tesla's DeathRay being operational and being a real thing as proof of concept, this was proven in a documentary series that aired in 2017 and 2018. A little-known documentary series called Tesla's DeathRay, A Murder Declassified. Well, one of the scientists working to try to reproduce Tesla's DeathRay was able to build a working model a 20-foot tall tower based upon Tesla's patents, and it was able to shoot drones out of the air multiple times in their own experiments. Now, this was a smaller mock-up, but it definitely was proof of concept. You see, Tesla's DeathRay, he was on point. He really developed the patents and technologies to do this. He most likely could have done exactly everything he said with it. This was proven by scientific experiment and observation, documented in this little-known documentary. It's been reproduced on a small scale. Now, if it's been reproduced on a small scale by somebody in the public sector for a documentary, imagine what the military-industrial complex has done with this. Decades prior to this. Especially when you speculate that they had access to some of these lost notes that were missing from Tesla's personal belongings when the FBI seized them in 1943 upon his death. What do they have in their records that they've worked with? And these things have been developed for real, in the real world. We have many weapon systems that are based upon these ideas put forth by Tesla. So Tesla's DeathRay, fact or fiction? Fact. And they've developed it to a larger scale, and they've developed it in directed energy weapons, scalar wave weapons, which I think Tesla was on the precipice of discovering the true nature and power of scalar wave technology upon his death. And I think his experiments and observations were sussing out a lot of the early aspects of this. And those within the auspices of the special access programs of the military-industrial complex have likely developed this out into real applications today, and we see the fingerprints of these technologies being used today. Certainly, scalar wave directed energy weapons are a real thing. These are all based upon Tesla's patents. So at the end of the day, Tesla's DeathRay, yes, this was real. This is not conspiracy theory or legend. It was a real device that he was able to design and build. I don't think Tesla ever utilized this in that way, though. If he did, it was under very strict circumstances, I'm sure, and the results of which he probably kept to himself, unless, of course, these are the things that are among his lost notes that are only speculated as to existing. We don't know the true nature of all of that. We do know that there are those who have testified that there were pages missing from the documentation that they received from the FBI. And the FBI itself claims that somebody had been there prior to them and had taken some things out of Tesla's room before they even got there. And as an interesting point to all of this, it was Donald Trump's uncle who was one of the initial people involved with obtaining Tesla's goods and notes and property from the New Yorker hotel upon his death. Political intrigue abounds with all of this stuff, but that's a story for another day. But let's leave it there tonight, folks. Tesla's DeathRay. Fact, not fiction. Is feasible, has been proven. Proof of concept has been established. It works. It probably works well beyond the scale of what's accepted in the mainstream public. At any rate, that's all the time we have for tonight, folks. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I want to remind you that I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one now. Discover the amazing, clinically proven health benefits of original Tahitian noni. Original Tahitian noni includes powerful antioxidants, adaptogens, nutrients, and phytonutrients to naturally boost energy levels, immune system function, and overall health. Meticulously sourced from French Polynesia, this is the original superfruit, except no imitations. Original Tahitian noni. Visit ATR Health at alchemicaltechrevolution.com. and click on the Shop Here tab for more details.
But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.